Welcome back to the Deep Dive, everybody. Today, we're taking a plunge into some listener tales from the Morbid podcast. They shared stories about dreams, astral projection, and even alternate realities.
Ooh, yeah. What I find so fascinating about these stories is that it seems like a thin veil between our world or others. It just makes you wonder, are these just like really vivid dreams, or is there something more to it?
Right. Like, what's going on? So let's jump right in. This first story is from Nikki, and she describes her old house in Columbus, Ohio as, and I quote, a spooky old trap house. So right off the bat, we've got a vibe. And to make things even more interesting, her girlfriend at the time, Stevie, was a self-proclaimed witch.
It's interesting because you hear a lot of stories about paranormal happenings in places where, maybe there's been some trauma or like a lot of intense emotions, like that energy just sort of sticks around and maybe that makes those places more likely to have, unusual activity.
So maybe the house itself was already primed for something spooky to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, think about it. Like our surroundings, they can totally affect how we feel, right? Like whether we're happy or stressed or whatever. So it makes sense that our surroundings could also affect, like our psychic experiences too.
Hmm. That's a really good point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Nikki's just lying in bed, thinking about life and death as you do, when Stevie suddenly screams. Turns out she'd seen this, like, soggy, dead old woman hovering right over Nikki.
Oh wow, that image, that visual of a soggy ghost. I mean, it's so creepy. But
Yeah.
it's also strangely specific. Makes you wonder like where did these images in our minds even come from? Are they just symbolic or could they actually be reflecting something real?
Right. It's wild.
Yeah.
Nikki actually even nicknamed her Moist Mima, which, okay, I know it's dark, but I gotta admit that's kind of funny. But what I find really interesting is that after Nikki and Stevie broke up, Nikki claimed that Stevie cursed her, and then, get this, a huge chunk of her hair fell out.
Hmm. That's really interesting. It makes you think about the power of suggestion. Like, could a curse, whether it's real or imagined, actually have like a real tangible effect? I mean, there's this thing called psychogenic illness where stress, like psychological stress, can actually cause physical symptoms.
So are you saying that Nikki's hair loss could have been like a psychosomatic reaction to the curse, even if the curse itself, wasn't real?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like belief is super powerful and it can really have a huge impact on how we experience things.
Wow, okay. All right, well, let's move on to our next story. This one is from Miss Mary Mack. She's a hospice nurse, so she's pretty comfortable with death. But then she had this super intense dream, and in this dream, her mom's mother-in-law, Frances, was trying to pull her into the afterlife. And get this, Frances wasn't exactly the nicest person.
Oh wow. Dreams, right. They can be so much more than just like random thoughts. They can really tap into our deepest fears and anxieties. And sometimes they even seem to like foreshadow real events. It's crazy.
I know, it's crazy. And in this case, well, Frances actually died the same night that Miss Mary Mack had this dream. She describes this feeling of being sucked into this void and just not being able to control it at all.
Yeah, that feeling of being pulled or drawn by some unknown force. It's actually pretty common in near-death experiences and other paranormal encounters. Some researchers think it might be linked to changes in brain activity, during these altered states of consciousness.
That's fascinating. What I find really amazing about Miss Mary Mack's story is that even after this super unsettling experience, she still she still wished Frances peace.
Absolutely, and I think that really speaks to a deep compassion and understanding of what it means to be human. Even though she was scared, she recognized that death is a natural part of life. And maybe Frances, in her own way, was just looking for some peace.
Okay, so this next story, this one takes us into some alternate reality territory. We've got Amber, and she's telling this story about how her friend actually guided her to this town in another dimension.
Whoa, what's really interesting about this one is that it's like a shared experience, right? Like both Amber and her friend, they both confirmed details about each other's journeys.
Yeah.
So it's almost like their consciousnesses were linked somehow.
Yeah, like they were using instant messenger to communicate, like back and forth between visits to this town, like confirming they weren't just making stuff up. And Amber even saw her friend in this other reality, like exactly how he described himself.
Wow, that's incredible. It reminds me of bilocation. It's this concept in parapsychology where people are supposedly seen in two places at once. It really makes you question what's actually possible, like
Yeah.
physically and just in terms of our perception.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. And Amber described the town as super peaceful, like idyllic, cobblestone streets, a clock tower, and there was even this friendly old man she would chat with. But then on one visit, the whole atmosphere just changed. Like dark clouds rolled in, this sense of dread just washed over her, and then suddenly she was pulled back to her own reality.
Yeah, that sudden shift, from peaceful to like menacing. It's actually a pretty common theme in stories about other dimensions, or parallel universes. It's almost like there are forces at play that we don't understand, right? Like not all realms are
It's
friendly.
like the town itself was giving her a warning or something.
Yeah.
And to this day, she still has this really strong intuition, like not to go back.
Yeah.
And speaking of intuition, this next story, it's about this guy named Nick, who, let's just say he learns the hard way about messing with dreams.
Oh yeah, Nick and the TikTok challenge. It's a classic example of how even something that seems harmless can have some unintended consequences, especially when you're dealing with the subconscious mind.
Yeah, so he saw this video on TikTok saying that you shouldn't ask for the time in a dream, and being a lucid dreamer, he was like, "Oh, I got to try this out." But, well, he ended up getting trapped in this terrifying loop, like asking for the time, and then bam, plunged into darkness, waking up and realizing he was still dreaming. This happened 5 times, and each time the mirror in his bedroom shattered.
Whoa, that's intense. The mirror shattering. It's like, mirrors usually symbolize reflections of the self, right? So
Yeah.
so the shattering, it could represent like a fracturing of his sense of reality, like within the dream.
Yeah, and then, as if things couldn't get any worse, this older man suddenly appears in his doorway, whispers, "Be careful," and then vanishes.
And this is where it gets really interesting, right? Because it turns out that Nick had already like sensed the presence of an older man in his house, but he hadn't told his boyfriend about it.
And get this, the older man in his dream, well, he was the previous owner of the house who had died there.
Yeah.
Nick's boyfriend confirmed it, like he had a photo and everything.
Wow, that's a classic case of what they call crisis apparitions, where people report seeing deceased loved ones, around the time of their death or during times of like extreme stress or danger.
So it's like this spirit, maybe a guardian angel, was trying to warn Nick about something. But, like, what was he warning him about? Was it just the TikTok challenge? Or was there something else, something darker, lurking in the dream world?
That's the thing, right? It really makes you think, even in the supposed safety of our own minds, there might be forces at play that we just don't fully grasp. Okay, well, for our last story, we have something a bit lighter. This is from Katie Blue, and she shared this funny little anecdote about accidentally astral projecting when she was just 6 years old.
Oh, wow. 6 years old. That's crazy.
I know, right? It's like kids, they just seem to have this more natural connection to the unseen world. Maybe because they haven't developed all the skepticism and filters that we adults have.
Yeah, that's true. So Katie's brother, he wakes up in the middle of the night and he sees her standing in front of the fireplace in the basement, completely still, head down. And he's like, "Katie, what are you doing down here? Let's go back to bed." But she doesn't respond. Nothing.
And the thing is, she was sound asleep in her own bed, so that really suggests that her consciousness was projected somewhere else, even though she has no memory of it whatsoever.
Wow. That's both hilarious and a little creepy. Katie Blue, if you're listening, we'd love to hear more.
It just goes to show even these seemingly harmless paranormal experiences, they can really stick with you, especially for those who witness them.
It's just amazing, these stories. They remind us that everyone has a story, and sometimes those stories, they take us into the extraordinary. And what we've explored today, it's just a peek into this vast world of the paranormal, this world where reality gets a little blurry, and where the power of the human mind, it's just front and center.
It's a world that really makes us question everything, our assumptions, what we think we know. It encourages us to explore the unknown and to really embrace those mysteries that are out there, beyond what we see every day.
Exactly. So as you go about your day, think about it. Could there be more to reality than what we can see?
Yeah.
And what about your own intuition? What's it trying to tell
And
you?
hey, who knows? Maybe someday we'll be sharing your story right here on the Deep Dive.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on this deep dive. Share your own dream experiences, any insights or questions on our social media. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep it weird.